Well, good morning again. We'll give people a second or two to leave. Okay, now we're ready.
All right, this morning's scripture is going to be in Hosea, chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. If you're using the chair Bibles, that's page 751. Again, Hosea 1, verses 1 through 3. The word of the Lord came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take yourself a wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom for forsaking the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblam, and she conceived and bore him a son.
Thank you, Toby. Appreciate that. 3 words in those verses stand out to me like none others. So he went. I'll unpack that, but I think that's pretty remarkable. We'll get to there, but in the meantime, in case you don't know where you're at, we're your church. This is Grace Life Bible Church. We're excited about God's grace. And so because we're intentional disciples who trust Jesus, we continually fix our eyes on Jesus. Now, if I said we are not weary achievers, we are grateful receivers, you would be right, but I'm switching things. We're thriving. Oh, yeah, it's tricky, right? Anyway, seriously, it's possible to thrive even when our story goes sideways. And if you're involved in this church, life groups, and some people among us are carrying extraordinary burdens, and it's possible to thrive in the midst of that. And Hosea has a job from God that sort of ruins his life. You know what I mean? And sometimes we think if God wants me to do a thing, it's going to be great, and I win, and everything's happy. And my response is, have you read the Bible? Because that doesn't always happen. So anyway, that's kind of where we're going. But God's grace, that's what we want to focus on. And here's the deal with God's grace. If you don't understand God's grace, you don't understand God. If you don't understand God's grace, you can't experience His grace. And if you don't understand God's grace, you can't extend His grace. So God's grace is not some add-on extra feature. It's the engine, it's the very character of who God is, okay? So you might be visiting and you're like, oh, Grace Bible Church, your thing is like the thing of grace. It's like, well, our thing is God, Jesus, and the heart of them is grace. Okay. Anyway, that's what makes us tick, okay? And so here's a new thing. Some of you didn't maybe get to come to our annual meeting last week, and I repackaged the triangle. Now we got a circle, all right? And so it's the same, communicating the same thing. You know, Jesus says, go make disciples. So why? Why do we exist? We exist to make disciples. And that's pretty vague, but that is what we do. And a disciple simply means a follower. We're following Jesus, okay? Now, our purpose, baptizing, teaching, all that I've commanded you. In our context, okay, this gives rise to our values: to know God through His Word, to experience grace and forgiveness, to grow in healthy relationships and impact others wherever, near, far, okay? So there's a natural cycle there. It starts with God and His Word. We read that, we encounter, we experience God's grace, transform a new heart, new covenant, new heart, and then we go and give that, we extend, we forgive, and purposely grow. And so that's kind of that's like the blood in our veins. Maybe not that works. I don't know, okay? And then how? A whole bunch of stuff. All the teams, and these are not all the teams, but a lot of teams. There's a lot of volunteers behind. That's just who we are. That's how we work and all that, okay? So the questions today. Do you know how to thrive when life goes sideways? What if God says, I have a chapter for you for the next 10 years that is going to completely derail your life and just incinerate any hope you have of your own happiness, and your preconceived notions, okay? Kind of what happened to Hosea. But what does God's relentless love have to do with how we perceive what we expect from Jesus? Okay, so we'll get into that. But first, just a fair warning here. I mean, we're making a hard shift. We've been talking about, what did we do? Galatians last? Some New Testament stuff, and now we're going to be parachuting down into foreign territory of the Old Testament, minor prophet Hosea. And the whole world is different, okay? So years ago, like 1996, 97, I went to Kazakhstan twice to teach theology. If you don't know where that is, it's just above Turkmenistan. But anyway, I'm sure that helps. So, but I went there and taught, and it was a whole other world. I mean, this is... I remember in Almaty, the capital city, so, 100,000 plus people, high-rise skyscrapers, wintertime, cold, and Soviet Union kind of feel. Everything's gray and dusty and sad and broken. And I see these two guys with this goat in front of this downtown skyscrapers, snow everywhere, and they're kind of the things, and they're wrestling it, and then they just slit its throat. And blood and steam. I'm like, I guess it's lunchtime. Like, I don't see that in Omaha. And I got a lot of stories. We were going to take a bus to go see a missionary in the town. And we were at the bus stop, but there's so many people. The buses were literally full. Even the hallway in the bus was crammed with people. And a bus would come, the doors open, and it's literally, there's no room. And this happened like 4 times. And so I said to Donna, we got to just go. So I am not kidding. A bus pulled up, the bifold doors open up. There's people right in there, even down onto the first step. There's one step that's empty. So Don and I just we jump on the lower step. I literally reach in, I just grab people's clothes. I'm just hanging on, but I had a backpack. And I'm on the lowest step. The door's shut. My backpack is outside the bus, because I'm just barely hanging on. I'm like, this place is crazy. Anyway, the point is, before I just spend an hour telling stories, the point is Hosea is a different kind of place, all right? Israel is a different kind of place. Assyria, they have pressures that I'll get you there. We'll walk through it. That'll be okay. But just so you know, it'll sound different, it'll feel different, but just trust me as we go through. I'll take you through, and we'll see the goodness of God in this context, okay? But the whole context of Hosea is around covenant. Covenants. Now, just so we understand, some of you this is old, some of you this is new. There's 2 kinds of covenants in the Old Testament, okay? There's the unconditional covenants where God says, I will. I'm doing this. Okay, the Abrahamic covenant, the Noah covenant, no more rain. I will not do that again, okay? Davidic covenant, unconditional covenants, God says, I will. And then there's the Mosaic 10 Commandments covenant, which is conditional. If, then. If you do this, then this. If you obey, then you're blessed. If you disobey, then there's consequences. Okay, so there's 2 different kind of covenants, and what Hosea is about is God took Israel out of Egypt to Mount Sinai, made a covenant with the Mosaic covenant. You're my people, I will be faithful to you, and I expect you to be faithful to me. And they signed the covenant multiple times. They said, we'll do that, that's great. And then they break that covenant, and so there's consequences, and this is what Hosea is about, okay? But just so you know, salvation, here's a good question. Where does salvation rest? In the I will category of unconditional covenants or the if-then conditional covenants? Salvation rests in the unconditional I will promise of God. And this is Paul's main argument in Galatians and Romans, where he says, hey, wait a minute. The I will promise existed long before the if-then conditional covenant. That's Paul's argument, okay? So just so we're squared on that, that's what we're doing, okay? And so here is kind of an image of Hosea. Hosea is all about God's relentless pursuit and his faithful love for his unfaithful people. It's pictured by Hosea's real-life marriage. He gets married, she runs away, and then there's restoration. The end. It looks neat, it sounds happy, but there's a lot of heartache and a lot of pain there, okay? And so God relentlessly pursues his unfaithful people on their worst day while they are not interested in it. And this is not just Israel. You might be thinking, there's people here and people in the sound of my voice that think, well, Israel just kind of, he's got confused. Oops. No, they are militantly embracing idolatry. They are purposefully shutting down worship to Yahweh. They are burning their babies to false gods. I mean, this is not just, oops, I was 2 miles an hour over the speed limit. No, this is a whole other thing, which causes God to take note. And he's like, okay, yeah, there's a line here, and okay, you crossed it. So that's kind of where we're going here. But another really neat thing about this whole story of Hosea, because nobody is beyond the realm of God's forgiveness, nobody should be beyond the realm of our forgiveness. And then we enter that whole wisdom in dealing with fallen people. We can forgive, but we don't need to remain in their world and have them continually beat us up, okay? So there can be forgiveness and healthy distance, boundaries. That's all part of just navigating a broken world, but we talked about that before. Okay, so here's how these 3 panels break down: marriage, adultery, restoration. So first off, there's marriage. Now therefore, Exodus 19 says, if you indeed obey my voice, keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. So they're like, this is great. We're going to do this. So there's the covenant, okay, the marriage. The adultery. Later on in Hosea chapter 7, God says Ephraim, and that's just a name for Israel in the north. Ephraim is like a dove, a silly and without sense, calling to Egypt, going to Assyria. Now, he's not saying you went there on vacation. You wanted to see the pyramids, and that's wrong. He's saying you're going there for your prosperity and your security. I am the one that gives you prosperity and security, and you don't know that, so you're like a silly dove. Okay? And then finally, the restoration. I will not, this is at the end of the book, I will not execute my burning anger. I will not destroy Ephraim, northern Israel. They shall go after the Lord. Instead of going after Assyria and Egypt, they will go after the Lord. He will roar like a lion. When he roars, his children will come trembling from the west. They'll come home. They'll come trembling like birds from Egypt, like doves from the land of Assyria. And I will return them to their homes, declares the Lord. So it's a good book, but in the middle, it's heavy and it's dark and it's real. Because sometimes our lives are heavy and dark. We just need to know there's restoration and there's hope at the end of the tunnel, and this book will get us there, okay? So that's kind of what's going on there. All right, so, see if I got a blank. I'll hold this up there for a bit. So the very first verse is interesting. The word of the Lord came to Hosea in the days of, and this is the kind of stuff we normally just kind of like whatever. In the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, in the days of Jeroboam, king of Israel. So this 4-to-1 thing. Like, what's with that? Okay, we'll dig into that. But first, Hosea's name is the same root word as Joshua, Jesus, Savior, Deliverer, Salvation, and that's what he's talking about. Okay, so let's just do a quick, brief history on how we get to Israel and what are we talking about, Ephraim and all that. So back in the book of Joshua, they from wandering through Egypt, they come up, they enter, headed west over the Jordan River. A bunch of battles in Joshua, the first 12 chapters. And so there's one nation, they get the nation. The second half of the book of Joshua, they divide the land up, and they've got 12 tribes. So that's where we get 12 tribes, okay? So that's how that works. And for the purposes of this book, Hosea, we need to know some vocabulary. Hosea calls the northern half of the nation Samaria or Ephraim. So when you're reading Hosea and blah, 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 Samaria, blah, 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 Ephraim, you're like a silly dove. He's talking about the 10 tribes of the north. And down here in the bottom, there's 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Judah, that's the southern. Now, if you use the word Israel, it's all of them together. I'm going to try to follow this, but sometimes I will say Israel when I just mean the northern Ephraim, okay? So anyway, that will be in the quiz, by the way, at 1 o'clock. Okay. Anyway, so that's what we're doing there. So, all right. But where are we? So here's what's been going on in the world around the time. This is mid-8th century BC, and Israel is in a very strategic place. God put Israel in the middle of an international highway. Now, I think Hawaii would have been a safer choice. There's no bad influence. There's no Baal worship. You're secluded. You're isolated. But this is not how God thinks. He's like, I want you to be in the intersection of the world so that you can tell others about me. And I put you here in Canaan, Palestine, Israel. And this is the intersection of the world. So you could be a missionary in your own front porch because people are coming to you. That's the idea. Okay, that's God's heart. And so, but the point is, around the 8th century, or before that, Mesopotamia from the north and Egypt were pushing and vying for control. And Mesopotamia wants to control Canaan, and Egypt wants to control because it's easier for them to launch attacks on their enemies. So everybody wants Canaan. And because of that, Israel was pinched and limited. But in the mid-8th century, for a lot of reasons, those pressures paused, and Israel was able to flourish politically, flourish economically, and not so much flourish spiritually, okay? But with great wealth came a lot of corruption. I know that's a new thought for some. But sometimes those things go together. Anyway, and so we see that here, great wealth, moral decay. Israel had been unfaithful, even though... And so since Solomon's time as the monarchy becomes this big thing, this bureaucratic machine that is not always connected to the heart of God, surprise. But here, just watch this. What territorial expansion and trade create a wealthy class and a class of poverty. So you have this huge separation. State expansion, bureaucracy, state taxes, a state military, even conscription of Israelite labor against their will, unpaid. That's what Solomon did. They moved from subsistence family farming to state-controlled farming, centralized governments, commodity markets. Kings actually annexed private land and used them for state purposes. All right? Some families lost their land and reduced to tenants or slave labor. Class conflict. So now we have money, sex, and power, or the 3 Gs, gold, girls, and glory, right? Or the 3 Is. Injustice, immorality, idolatry. And so Hosea's world is a mess. His country is a mess. And they haven't just, made a mistake. They're wholeheartedly embracing this Baal worship. It's probably best pronounced Baal, but I'm just saving a syllable, right? They're hard to find these days, so I'm going to say Baal, okay? Anyway, that's just what I'll do. But so it sounds kind of like socialism, right? It's crazy, but it's not socialism that's a later development, but it sure looks like that. I think that's just the sinful heart of mankind. When we start to rule and control, we do this kind of stuff because it's coming from a fallen. If you have more questions about that, 11 o'clock, we have a class right down there that we're talking about that very thing, capitalism, socialism, and all that. Because our faith matters, and our faith, it should leak out Monday through Saturday and not just be in here. So, okay, that's what's going on there. So let's take a look here and see this verse. In the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Oh, also, it was the days of Jeroboam, except there's 5 kings here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anyway, that he doesn't even mention. And so you're like, well, wait a minute. You're writing to the north, but you don't even list all their kings. What's up with that? Okay, here are the kings that he just ignores. Zechariah, killed after 6 months. Shallum, killed Zechariah. And then Menahem killed Shallum. Now, Menahem died naturally, sort of a weird thing, but then Pekahiah, he assassinates Menahem. And Pekah assassinates Pekahiah. And Hosea assassinated Pekahiah. And so it's a bit of a train wreck. Apologies to my brother-in-law who used to work for UP. He doesn't like that term, but it works. We know what we mean by train wreck, right? It's just a mess. And so why does Hosea just say the days of Jeroboam and not the rest? He's going upstream to right before the wheels fall off and it crashes, right? And I think if you're alive in that culture and he mentions Jeroboam and no one else, you're like, oh, yeah, we get it. You know what I mean? We know exactly what you're talking about, okay? So that's just kind of what he's talking about there. So all of this, again, with a covenant in mind, there's consequences for infidelity, and the consequence in his culture was Assyria. And so as a bit of a history graphic here, we have Saul. Trying to hit the right button. We have Saul, David, Solomon, united monarchy. The first half of 1 Kings is about the united monarchy. Solomon dies. The last part of 1 Kings is about the divided monarchy. Israel, see right there, I should say Samaria, but anyway, north and south, 10 tribes up in the north, 2 in the south. The first half of 2 Kings is all about how come the northern 10 tribes were annihilated in 722 BC. That's what the first half of 2 Kings is about, all right? And it's all because covenant consequences. This is not a surprise. And they're annihilated, politically they're annihilated because of what Assyria did. There's still people there, but they lose, and they never come back in Scripture. Israel never comes back as an autonomous nation. They're just, have you ever heard of the lost tribes? We're going to explain that. This is exactly why the tribes are lost. So in 722 BC, here's a verse from 2 Kings 17. In the 9th year, this is 722 BC, of Hosea, the last king, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. Now, there is a city called Samaria too. So he captured Samaria, but also the whole northern place. Carried away Israel into exile to Assyria, settled them all over the place. Halal, Habor, on the river, and Gozan, in the city of the Medes. So this is what Assyria did. I've talked about this before. Their strategy, and they conquered a lot of different places, but they would conquer it, and they would take people from, like, Israel that they conquered and spread them out into completely foreign, strange places. You cannot communicate different language. They worship different gods. So can you mount a rebellion? No, you cannot, because you can't even talk to your neighbor. No one's on the same page, okay? So this is just what they did. And they also then did the inverse or reverse or just the opposite. They transplanted foreigners from other places that they had conquered into Israel. So you've got thousands. By the way, that 27,000 people from Israel were taken away and spread out. So maybe 27,000 were dumped in. And so now in Israel, who has this record of being God's chosen nation with a lot of covenant laws, some of them are about don't intermarry with non-Jewish people because we need a Messiah. By the way, God is like, that's what we're doing here. I got to solve sin, so help me out and follow the law so I can get a Messiah. Okay? And so they intermarry, these foreigners, and they have children who are not pure Jews. They're half-breeds, and they are the Samaritans. This is where the Samaritan people start. If you've read the New Testament about the Good Samaritan and how the Jews hate the Samaritans, this is the background. So the pure Jew is going to look at the history of the Samaritans and say, you are the threat to our very nation's existence. So they do not like them. Okay, you got the point. So moving on. But why does Assyria do this in the first place? The consequences for covenant infidelity, covenant disobedience. I'll talk about that here in a second, but right now we'll go to Exodus, and you can see their agreement. All the people answered together after a covenant presentation and said, all the Lord has spoken we will do. Exodus 24:3. Moses told all the people the words of the Lord and all the rules. The people said, with one voice, all the words the Lord said we will do. A couple verses later, he took the book of the covenant, read it in their hearing, and they said, all the Lord has said we will do, we will be obedient, all right? And so it's not like they got suckered into this thing. They're straight up owning it. This is what we want to do. Okay, so now just going to drop in several different passages from the Old Testament. about wealth and the importance of understanding where wealth comes from, because the culture attributed wealth to Baal, the god of storm, fertility, crops, all that. And God is like, hey, but that's not true. I'm the one that give you wealth. And so even before they got into Jericho, before they started fighting the land in the book of Joshua, in the book of Deuteronomy, I love this passage here because it's so interesting. This is Deuteronomy 7. So you're in the Transjordan. You have not crossed the river. You're not even in the promised land. And God is saying, when you go over there, watch out. Because you listen to these rules, keep and do them, the Lord your God will keep you with a covenant and the steadfast love He swore to your fathers. He will love you, bless you, multiply you. And there's a whole lot of language of fertility and wealth, prosperity and security here in these verses. He will bless the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your ground, your grain, your wine, your oil, the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock in the land that's across the river that He swore to your fathers. So God is like, hey, when you go across the river, you're going to hear a different story. This is the true story. You need to know. So God doesn't put them in Hawaii isolated. He puts them in a place of friction, a place of difficulty, where they have to depend on Him in faith, okay? So that's kind of what's going on there. But one comment here, the phrase, your grain, your wine, your oil, happens a lot in the book of Hosea because they've misattributed who gives them grain, wine, and oil, which is prosperity and security. They think it comes from Baal, and they've forgotten God, okay? Hard to imagine, but that's the story. Okay, so, and in the covenant language, He says, if you continue to disobey me, I will multiply, I will discipline you sevenfold for your sins. And listen to this. This sounds just like Assyria coming. This is Deuteronomy 28. If there's disobedience, the Lord will bring you and your king that you set over you to a nation. Get that? The Lord's going to bring you and your king that you chose, that I didn't choose, He's going to take you to another place, another nation, that neither you nor your fathers have known. And there they will serve other gods of wood and stone, because that's what you're choosing. All right? And listen to this. It goes on. Because you didn't serve the Lord with all your heart, therefore you shall serve enemies whom the Lord will send against you in hunger and thirst and nakedness and lacking everything. Okay, wait a minute. We just read this verse about how God is giving you everything. Yes, if you obey, you get the blessings. If you don't, it's not just external punishment. You're losing the very means of experiencing the joy that God has for you because you're shutting the door to them. And so the Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping down like an eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand, a hard-faced nation who will not respect the old or show mercy to the young. It will eat the offspring of your cattle and the fruit of your ground until you are destroyed. It will not leave your grain, wine, or oil, the increase of your herds, your young flocks, until they've caused you to perish. So it's just that concept. Bottom line here is the people of Israel have forgotten where prosperity and security come from. They think it's from their cultural god Baal, and God is like, that's not at all what happens, and Hosea's job is to help them remember that's not at all the way it works. And it sounds easy, but for them to disengage worshiping Baal is to completely pull out of the whole culture. That's just how the culture works. So where do you go? You got nowhere to go. It's very difficult, okay? So here's a question, though. I was thinking about this and the whole covenant, conditional, and all these consequences. It seems a bit heavy. And so I thought, somebody is probably wondering, if God is so gracious, what is up with all these consequences for covenant failure? How come He can't just forgive? That's a good question, right? No? Okay, I'll just move on. Anyway, yeah, I was wondering about that. And so there is forgiveness for an individual for covenant violations. There is forgiveness, but the dominoes, the collateral damage, the damaged relationships, we live with those. Those are not forgiven in the sense of that now shapes my reality. And we all know this. I've been forgiven for this thing with that person, but the relationship is over because whatever, okay? That's just the nature of life. And so there is forgiveness for covenant violations, but God is trying to help us avoid all these landmines that blow up and can derail the life that we prefer. Whatever life we have, we can experience God's grace. How much baggage do you want to take along is the issue here, okay? That's what he's talking about. And so this is an issue because Israel has misattributed wealth to Baal. So the very beginning of the book, this is bookends, front and back. Very beginning, Israel did not know it was I who gave her the grain, wine, and oil. There it is. And lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. The very end of the book. O Ephraim, northern nation, what have I to do with idols? It is I who answer and look after you. I am like an evergreen cypress. From me comes your fruit. In one sense, one of the main points of this book is understanding where your prosperity and security come from. We don't look to Baal. They looked to flocks. They looked to grain, wine, and oil. We look to the stock market and the military, among other things, you know what I mean, to get a sense of we're okay. You open up your account on your laptop. How am I doing? Oh, no. Markets are down. Okay, and that's part of, Proverbs is like, yeah, be wise, do that, be wise. But it's a great servant, a horrible master, right? That kind of thing. So this is the tension in the book of Hosea, trying to figure out where prosperity comes from. It's a good question for us. Where do we really get prosperity and security? Okay, so what is the deal with this Baal worship, and how come they were interested in it? All right, a quick tour of that. A lot of it has to do with the nature of Canaan, where they were. Unlike Egypt, in Egypt, every year the Nile floods like clockwork, the exact same week of the exact same month, and it flooded so much, they would literally, before the rains came, dig these trenches, just like a bunch of capillaries going off an artery all over the place, and they would leave a berm of dirt channeling the water so that when the rains came, they could just go and take their foot and just drag that barrier off, and the water would flow down this entire other network. They never had to worry about rain or water. Mesopotamia, you've got the Tigris and Euphrates. They never have to worry about water. Canaan, if it doesn't rain, you die. Period. And so in Canaan, the Baal god who controls rain and storm is everything. If you ask anybody in Canaan, hey, mommy, daddy, how come it rains? Baal is the god of storm, and he's the god of thunder. He's the one who gives us life and fertility. And this whole Baal cycle is tied to their agricultural cycle, and here's kind of how it went. I guess I'll get to that later. But anyway, it's the promised land, even though there's no rain, because when it does rain, things really, really grow. And it's famous for abundant crops. A couple quotes of other people. Here's a quote from somebody traveling through it way back when. A paradise with corn and fruit like Egypt. The region is small, but its wine, oil, and apples are superior to Egypt. The millet is abnormally tall. The stalks are bigger than the height of man. The tale of Sinew and a wandering Egyptian. He wrote this down. He said, figs were in it, and grapes. It has more wine than water. Abundant was its honey, plentiful its oil. All kinds of fruit was on its trees. Barley was there, and emmer, no end to cattle of all kinds. So when it rained, it just was literally flowing with milk and honey. But if it doesn't rain, then you're in trouble, okay? And so the people that lived there kind of wanted to manipulate the gods and make sure it rained, and that's the whole reason they're doing that, okay? This is what God says in Deuteronomy 11 about Canaan. The land that you're going over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drinks water by the rain of heaven. Now, to them, that would be like, no, it's not like Egypt. It's not Mesopotamia. This land, you've got to have rain from heaven. And it's a land that the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are always on it, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So when it's not raining, he knows. And when it's raining, he knows it all comes from him, okay? So, another Deuteronomy 8. You shall remember the Lord your God. I love this one. For it is he who gives you power to get wealth. Amazing. So God controls the rain, and this Baal process, kids ask teachers, why does it rain? It comes from Baal. The whole story is that Baal is the god of thunder, and he would fight the Mot, the god of death, and he would get killed. He would die, but be held in captivity in the netherworld, and because Baal's captive, there's no rain. That's what they would teach their kids. That's why it's not right. Because Baal, he lost a battle and he's dead. And then his sister, Anat, would go down to the netherworld and fight Baal and rescue him, revive him, and resuscitate, and he comes back. And then it rains. This is their story, and they repeated this at every agricultural festival every year. That's just how it went. So here's a quick little picture of Baal. It's a statue. He holds a thunderbolt, so a lightning storm, and also vegetation, things that grow. This is the Old Testament God that they chose to worship instead of Yahweh, the creator of heaven and earth. Okay? He also controls human reproduction, and so you don't have to think too far to imagine how twisted that can get. And it did get twisted. And so all of this has a big impact on the nations around them. Israel would go to Assyria and Egypt for help, for security, and meanwhile, those other nations would come into Israel wanting a platform there. So when desperation is disconnected from God, you have idolatry. Think of our own lives. When desperation is disconnected from God, we will drift to our own Assyria, right? To money or control of a relationship or health or whatever it is. So when we get disconnected from God, we are open to a lot of crazy things. And then you get to verse 2. When the Lord spoke to Hosea, the Lord said, "Go, take yourself a wife of whoredom, have children of whoredom, for the land commits great harlotry by forsaking the Lord." So he went. No pushback. Moses pushed back, right? Jonah just said, forget it. Ezekiel pushed back. Abraham said, okay. He had to convince Sarah, we're going. But Hosea just goes. I find that to be pretty powerful. He just went. Okay. And his life is over. It's like Mary. You're going to give birth to the Son of God. And by the way, your life is over. You will be hated, despised, made fun of for the next 30, 40 years. We don't think of the weight of receiving God's blessing. Sometimes there is a price tag to that. But Hosea's life, the marriage that he hoped for, not the one he's getting. And to be clear, go marry a wife of harlotry. Probably she became unfaithful after the marriage. There's really no indication either way. But it's still painful. Anyway, so we'll get into that. I'll continue to unpack that next week. But this is what we're talking about here. I guess I should have had that verse up there when I was reading that. We'll go to that later. So Hosea is about God's relentless pursuit and faithful love of his unfaithful people. Hosea is a wounded messenger. Have you ever felt like a wounded messenger? God gives you a task, a burden, a ministry, and it's painful. And you don't win. And there's not the blessings you were expecting. You are a wounded messenger. You know what? Jesus was a wounded messenger, right? The incarnation, the crucifixion, and then the resurrection. And so we see this cycle in Hosea's personal life and his ministry of death and darkness and resurrection and hope. And so here's a good quote about pain and Jesus. "I could never myself believe in God if it were not for the cross. The only God I believe in is the one Nietzsche ridiculed as the God on the cross. In the real world of pain, how could one worship a God who is immune to it?" That's just rich. We worship a God who is not immune from pain. When we have pain, we can identify with him. He had pain. He had government pain. He had financial pain. He had family pain. They thought he was crazy. He had pain with the authorities. He had pain with his disciples. They never got it. He has pain on every front, okay? And so what we're saying is I'm going to skip that. We'll just move on to that. I'll maybe pull that back later. But because of God's relentless love, we can thrive. That's the bottom line, okay? We can thrive because of his relentless love for us. And so life moves pretty quick. We got to slow down and think and actually have some quiet. So a couple questions. So he went. Are you willing to go? And it doesn't mean go to Africa. It could mean the Lord's like, here's a season I have in front of you, and it's not what you want. You will become a wounded messenger. And you and Hosea and Jesus will have a special table. The three of you will grow close. Where are you thinking your fruit or that your prosperity, your security? And you'll know where that is when something starts to fall apart and we panic. That's a clue. It's a good indicator, so just pay attention to that. Draw near to Jesus and think about eternity and not just tomorrow. How does God's relentless pursuit and faithful love for his unfaithful people encourage you? Wow. I don't have to have my act together for him to love me. I mean, if there's any doubt about that, look at the story of what the people of Israel are doing, and he still loves them, so I think we have a shot. You know what I mean? Seriously, as you read the book Hosea, you're like, I think this is, it's a train wreck. Okay. So these are some questions we'll focus on today. We'll get into it. We'll continue to go, and we'll see the goodness of God and his relentless pursuit and his faithful love. So thank you, Lord, for your faithful love, your relentless pursuit. On our worst day, while we were still enemies, you died for us. We'll just receive that. We're stunned, undeserving, and guard our hearts from being proud and arrogant and trying to blind ourselves with some lie about how awesome we are. We're just lucky to be here. Thank you for your forgiveness. Thank you for your relentless love. And I pray that as we go from here, that impact would just flow from grateful lips and a healed heart. Teach us to thrive in our circumstances and point to you as the one worth following. Amen.